Are you looking for a resource to help with your burnout? Then this month's book therapy pick is for you. Everyone, my name is Diana Garcia. I'm a licensed mental health counselor in Florida, owner of a private practice called Nurturing Minds Counseling. My monthly book therapy series where I pick one mental health self-help book to recommend, review, and 3 key insights just in case you never pick up the book. So let's jump into this month's pick. This month's pick, as you can see from the screen, is Burnout: The Secret to Unlocking the Stress Cycle. It was written by 2 twin sisters, Emily Nagoski and Amelia Nagoski. I hope I'm not killing their last name. This book became pretty popular. It was released 2019. I want to say through the pandemic, it really blew up, particularly because Brene Brown had them on her podcast, which I'll link in the notes below. I read this late last year, so I really had to jog my memory. But as you can see, there were so many kind of stickies that I have, highlights, because there's just a lot of good insights in here. So let's jump into the actual book summary. So the book is broken down into 3 parts. As you can see, part 1, it's really more what you take with you. So this is talking more about burnout, what it really is, current stats, and really kind of talking about how burnout originally was focused on helping professionals, but really now it's being expanded. I think in just everyday language, more and more people are acknowledging burnout in their workplaces and in their home lives. And then it goes through kind of 3 internal resources that you can use, as you can see on the screen. I'm only going to go through one in today's insights just because I only have so much time. Part 2 is the real enemy. So this really focuses on how the game is rigged, particularly for women and women of color. So the focus is on how certain, like the patriarchy, how that's played a role, and also the bikini industry. So just messages, societal, cultural messages that we've received that's really kept us stuck, and part of the reason why a majority of us are burnt out. The third part, wax on, wax off, it's really talking about kind of tools that you can actually use at your disposal to help you with burnout. So connection, rest, and self-compassion. Throughout the book, there are resources sprinkled in. So like worksheets, things that you can write down, looking at your calendar, at your schedule, how you can make decisions. And throughout the book, it kind of has like this pop culture feel. So if you're not into that, you might get turned off by the book. I really appreciated it because I can resonate with the references, even the wax on, wax off, right? The Karate Kid, for all you other millennials out there. So just kind of have that in mind if you pick up this book. Okay, so I picked an insight from each parts of the book. So part 1, it's really breaking down the stress cycle because I think that's the core of this book. So if you can see here from the diagram, it talks about what the stress cycle is and how you really need to complete it by doing this last part, the behavior. But let's start off with what is the stress cycle. So stress cycle is when we are kind of confronted with stressors, which can be anything internal or external. External being like you have a work deadline looming. Internal can be you have thoughts that you're not going to be able to handle it. You feel overwhelmed, right? Or it can be a combination of both. When you're presented with a stressor, that activates the stress response, which stress is the neurological and physiological shifts in your body. So your body's response to handle these stressors, and then the behavior is whatever you do to deal with the stressor and or the stress in your body. So kind of evolutionary perspective, we talk about how this cycle really evolved. So stressors back in the day, it's, you see a bear in the distance, or actually let's go with the example in the book. You see a lion in the distance and you're like, oh my God, I'm about to be Sunday's lunch, so I have to hightail it out of there, right? So that fight, flight, freeze response kicked in, the flee really comes active. So, okay, I have to run back to the village and see if my tribe can help me combat this lion. You get there in time, you rally up the group, they all help you combat the lion dies, you all cheer, you're great, you're excited. So again, you've completed the stress cycle. You had the stressor, the lion, the stress, kicks in that fight, flight, freeze response, and then the behavior, not only the running, but actually getting to your tribe, the connection, feeling supported, actually being able to kill the lion, and then the release, you celebrate together. That whole kind of behavioral process signals to your body, right? Signals to the stress parts of your body that the threat is eliminated and that you can start to calm down. So it's really key here. It's that there's a real key physiological response that starts to happen when you complete this cycle that signals to your body that, hey, the threat is no longer looming. Now, how this applies to current days, clearly we're not in threat of being eaten by the lion for the most part, most of us, if we're living in kind of Western society. But the reality is that our minds and bodies can't really distinguish that. So we perceive these stressors, these everyday stressors that still activate that stress response in our body and still kicks in that fight, flight, or freeze response in our system, which then they go through the book, all the changes that starts to happen in your body when that gets activated. The really crucial part, as you can see from this next part, is that nowadays, let's say we are dealing with the stressors, or maybe we can't deal with the stressors for whatever reason in that moment. So let's say, okay, the stressor is this looming work deadline. So let's say you complete that, so you've dealt with it, but you still have this high level of stress in your body, right? So you haven't been doing anything on a daily basis, any behaviors to help you deal with the actual stress response in your body. You haven't done anything to complete the cycle, right? So that's what they really talk about. It's really key to complete the cycle. They also talk about what happens when we're under chronic stress and what that looks like. And specifically, if we're not building in any behaviors, not only to deal with the stressors, or if we can't deal with the stressors, right? Maybe some stressors are out of our control, but that we then really need to focus on completing the cycle to really then get rid of, or to signal to our body that we are no longer a threat. The stressor is no longer going to be a danger to us. And so in the book, they go through different strategies, but one really key is any type of physical movement really signals to your body that you're okay and kind of completes the stress cycle. And they go through other strategies and other tips that you can do to complete the stress cycle, but I want you guys to really think about what would be the behaviors that you could do to kind of signal to your body that you're okay, that the stress is gone, and really on a daily basis, what does that look like? Okay, so as you can see from the screen, the second key insight, it's talking about this human giver syndrome. So they reference it, it's based on someone else's work, but they really talk about it in the second part, in the role that the patriarchy has played, and really buying into this belief that women should give everything they have, including their emotional energy and their bodies, to everyone else, to society, to their people that they care about. I think particularly they talk about how this is prevalent in mothers, and pretty much any woman, honestly, and how even more so we've been conditioned since the day we're born to really buy into this belief that everyone else's needs are more important than our own, and that we really were meant to be like, we should be happy, content, and pretty, and stay quiet, and we should kind of fall into those norms. But these other kind of, speaking up for ourselves, being assertive, being ambitious, putting our needs first, that's not really conditioned, and if anything, that's kind of been turned down and told not to do throughout our lives. They talk about how this kind of human giver syndrome can really backfire and be one of the reasons why so many of us are burnt out and exhausted, because we're buying into these cultural messages, which makes it feel like we're being selfish if we're taking care of our own needs, right? Makes it feel selfish if, we're putting our needs before our kids' needs, or our partner's needs, or our parents' needs. And so it's really encouraging to challenge this societal belief and recognizing how you can start to really shift into prioritizing your needs and really taking care of yourself. So that's a big piece about the burnout. And I really appreciate one thing they talk about in the book. It's really having you look at what's really on your plate. And once you've allocated your time, but in terms of allocating your time to taking care of yourself first, rest, sleep, completing the stress cycle, then being clear, like, what else could you have to give, but after you've already prioritized your own internal needs. And so I think this is really key in noticing if you're falling to any of these traps or beliefs that are set up against you. All right, so the last insight is really talking about the different ways of attention that happen. So there's one piece of attention when we're really in this task positive. So we're like focused on engaging on a task, we're working, we're checking things off our to-do list, right? So our attention is really honed in on a task. A lot of times, clearly, we're striving for that. We feel more productive when we're doing that. This other piece is default mode network. That's more when you're just like daydreaming, your mind's wandering off. Maybe you just kind of are doing this like endless scrolling, but you're not really focused or paying attention. So a lot of times people really want to stay away from that mode because they feel like it's unproductive, which again, we're talking about in the patriarchy, your worth is linked to your productivity. But anyways, this other piece really talks about that when you're in the default mode, your mind is actually still kind of working in the background. And it's still working in the background to problem solve, to think of new ideas, and maybe think of kind of out of the box ideas that you can't really think of in this task, like this focus mode. And so if you think about it, like even when you're in the shower, for the most part, most of us aren't really being like really task engaged. We kind of tend to be mindless and we're just kind of doing this repetitive behavior. And a lot of times people talk about like, God, I had the greatest idea while I was in the shower. And that's probably because your default mode was on. You weren't really focused, but your kind of creative juices, your mind was still working back there. It's kind of like your computer. Even when it's in sleep mode, it still has like these background processes going to make sure it's still kind of on per se. And so it's really talking about it's okay to have more of these moments. And if anything, you want to really cultivate more of these kind of default modes to really help your kind of creative juices flow, but also that it's really helpful to have those moments so that you can have more rest and rejuvenate and have more moments of recharging. So I'd encourage you next time you're daydreaming, just kind of notice that. It's like, ooh, my mind's default mode. I wonder what it's doing back there. And know like, hey, that's normal. And you're actually helping your mind that way. And that's actually helpful for you. Check out more books that I've reviewed in my book therapy series. I encourage you to check out the playlist now. And as always, I encourage you to continue nurturing your mind, body, and soul, whatever that looks like for you. Thanks, guys, and I hope you have a great one.